By the spring of 1880, the desert wind carried 1,000 names for Billy the Kid. But that night, when he rode into the forgotten town of Esperanza, with dust in his teeth and blood drying on his shirt, he carried something worth far more than his own head: a leather ledger stolen from Jesse Evans, and a small iron key that could unlock the ruin of half the outlaws in New Mexico territory. The town crouched in a hollow of the land, a handful of lamps fighting back the dusk, the smell of coal smoke and old sweat hanging over the single main street. Billy's sorrel gelding staggered as he drew up in front of the Whitfield Hotel, foam on its neck, flanks spattered with sand from the jornada. Billy slid out of the saddle, with that loose, easy grace that made people forget how tired he really was. One hand pressed to the thin line of fire along his ribs where a bullet had kissed him earlier that day. He kept Jesse Evans' ledger tight against his side, under his coat, like it was part of him now, something he could not afford to lose or trust to a saddlebag. He pushed open the hotel door and stepped into warm lamplight and the faint sweet smell of baking bread left over from supper. Behind the counter stood a young woman who did not look like she belonged to any dusty little town, much less one as worn out as Esperanza. She was 22, slender but not fragile, her natural blonde hair fixed back in a simple knot that still could not hide how soft it looked, as if sunlight had been combed and twisted and pinned. Her face was all clean lines and quiet strength, but it was her eyes that made Billy stop, just for half a breath. One eye was a clear, cool blue like a high winter sky, the other a soft green, almost golden at the center, like new leaves after rain. Heterochromia, some doctor up in Santa Fe might have said, but to the men who came and went through these doors, they were reason enough to spit the word witch under their breath. She looked at him, taking in his torn shirt, the brown smears on the fabric where blood had dried, the dust that had settled into every crease of his clothes. Her hand, which had been resting on an open ledger, froze for a moment. "You look like the desert chewed you up and only half decided to spit you out," she murmured, voice low but steady. "You needing a room, mister?" Billy gave a small, crooked smile, trying to push through the fog of exhaustion. "Reckon so, ma'am. Somewhere with 4 walls and a door that shuts. I can pay." He reached carefully into his coat, keeping his movements slow, pulling out folded notes and some coins, making sure not to show the leather-bound ledger hidden deeper inside. Her eyes flicked to the money, and then back to his face, and he saw something there: wariness, yes, but also concern. "Name?" she asked. He hesitated only a heartbeat. "William Bonney." It was one of his truths, too, even if it wasn't the one printed on most wanted posters. "All right, Mr. Bonney," she said, dipping her pen in ink and writing his name in her book in clean, neat letters. "You're in room 3, top of the stairs, to the left." She paused, studying the way he held his side, the stiffness in his jaw when he breathed. "You're hurt." "Just scratched myself on some bad company," Billy answered, trying for lightness, but it came out more strained than he intended. "Nothing I can't sleep off." She clearly did not believe that, and for some reason, it mattered to him that she did. "There's no one else checked in tonight," she said quietly, glancing toward the darkened dining room. "Kitchen's closed, but I can still get the stove going. I can put together some supper, heat some water for a bath. That cut doesn't look like something you just sleep off." "That's more than you owe a stranger," Billy said, "especially this late." "Maybe," she answered, a corner of her mouth lifting, though there was sadness in it. "But my mother always said a place like this is more than a business. It's a roof between people and whatever's chasing them. Besides, I'm off the clock, like the railroad men say. No one can say I'm giving away the hotel's money." She stepped out from behind the counter, and he saw that she moved with a kind of quiet purpose, like someone who had learned to do everything herself because there was simply no one else. As she passed him, he caught the faint scent of soap and chamomile. "Name's Claire Whitfield," she added. "My folks built this place before. Well, before they were gone. Now I run it alone." The way she said it told Billy not to push further, so he only nodded. "Claire," he repeated, the name sitting easy on his tongue. "Thank you." She led him up the narrow staircase, the boards creaking softly under their steps. Room 3 was small but tidy. A narrow bed, a washstand, a cracked mirror, and a single window that looked over the dark main street. "You sit," she ordered gently, pointing to the bed. "I'll get the water going, and if anyone knocks on your door tonight, it won't be me, so don't open it." "You expecting trouble?" he asked, lowering himself slowly onto the bed and trying not to wince. She hesitated by the doorway. "In this town, trouble doesn't send telegrams in advance. But I like to keep it downstairs, where I can see it." Then she was gone, boots tapping back down the steps, leaving Billy alone with the thin walls and his own breathing. He let the weight of the day press down on him for a moment. From the Giornata del Morto all the way here, he had been nothing but a blur of horseflesh and gunfire, the stolen ledger thumping against his side every time the gelding stretched into a run. Jesse Evans had been only a few hundred yards behind at one point, his men howling like coyotes, bullets snapping through the air. But Billy had cut south at a dry wash where their horses could not follow so easily, vanished into a tangle of arroyos only he and a handful of Mescalero boys knew, and by dusk he'd outpaced them. Somewhere back there, Jesse Evans, cold-eyed and furious, was counting his remaining men and thinking about the ledger Billy had taken. A careful list of bribes, murders, army supply contracts, and quiet dealings with smaller men like the ones who bled this town. It was more than ink and paper, it was a loaded pistol pointed at everyone whose name was written in it. Billy leaned back on the thin mattress, feeling springs press into his shoulder blades, and let his eyes close just long enough to stop the room from spinning. That ledger was his chance at more than just a few extra dollars. Maybe it was a way to shake loose of some of the dirt that clung to his name. Maybe. He heard the clatter of pots, the muffled thump of wood in a stove, and the faint hum of Claire's voice as she moved below. There was something strange about letting someone else fuss around for his comfort. Most of his life, no one had. When she came back with steaming buckets, she had rolled up her sleeves, stray strands of blonde hair slipping loose around her face. Her mismatched eyes shone in the lamplight as she poured water into the tin tub and mixed in cooler water from a pitcher until the steam softened. She set down a plate of bread, beans, and a small slice of leftover roast on the washstand. "Eat first, or you'll slide right under that water and not come back up," she said, trying to sound stern and only half succeeding. Billy smiled, a real one this time, slow and boyish, the kind that had charmed ranch wives and saloon girls and had not saved him from a damn thing. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "You always take this kind to every drifter limping through your door. Only the ones who look like they might still have a soul rattling around under all that dust," she shot back, and then immediately looked embarrassed by her own boldness. "Anyway, I'll leave you to it. If you need anything else, you shout. But not too loud, or old Mrs. Ortega across the way will think I've started renting the place by the hour." This time Billy laughed softly, and the sound seemed to loosen something tight in her shoulders. She slipped out, closing the door with a quiet click. Pale lamplight and the smell of warm food filled the room. Billy ate with quick, precise motions, hollow as a winter creek bed, then stripped down and eased himself into the bath, teeth gritting when the hot water met the raw edge of his wound. He cleaned the blood away as best he could, wrapped a strip of torn shirt around his side, and for the first time in days let himself stretch out fully on a bed. Through half-lidded eyes, he watched the shadow of Claire's feet move past the crack under the door once, then twice, as she checked the hallway. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was the faint glow of her lamp retreating down the stairs, and one bright flash where the light caught her blue eye, then her green. Dawn, in Esperanza, did not come gently. Billy was jerked awake by shouting. The first word a harsh, ugly witch flung up the stairwell like a stone. He rolled from the bed, his hand already reaching for the Colt on the chair beside him, bare feet hitting the floorboards with barely a sound. Another voice, deeper, coarser, followed the first. "Come on, freak eyes, you know what day it is. Mr. Vance doesn't wait on no one. especially not some little monster with mismatched peepers. There was a crash, something wooden knocked over, and Claire's voice, strained but unbroken. "I told you last week, I'm short. Business has been slow, you burned half the customers out of this town yourselves." "Not our problem," another man drawled. "Tax is tax. The boss wants his cut. Maybe if your ma and PA hadn't stuck their noses where they didn't belong, you'd have someone left to lend you coin." Billy did not stop to pull on his boots. He jammed his revolver into the waistband of his pants, snatched his shirt and shrugged into it as he moved, ignoring the pull at his side. At the top of the stairs, he paused just long enough to take in the scene below. 4 men stood in the lobby, boots muddy, hats low, guns slung careless on their hips, the way only men who liked using them did. One was tall and narrow-faced with a scar down his cheek, another thick through the shoulders, his paunch straining against his vest. The third had a lazy, mean smile that never touched his eyes. The fourth, youngest, lingered near the door like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Claire stood behind the counter, one hand braced on the wood, her ledger knocked to the floor, pages fluttering. Her hair had come loose around her face, and there was already a red mark blooming on her arm, where the tall one had grabbed her. They were laughing, and every laugh landed on her like a blow. "Look at those eyes," the scarred man jeered, leaning in close, his breath sour. "One for heaven, one for hell. Ain't natural. Your mama should have drowned you in a water trough when she saw him." He reached across the counter and shoved her hard. Claire stumbled, her hip catching the edge, and she went down with a strangled sound, as the big man beside him roared with laughter. "Maybe we take our payment a different way, huh?" the big one sneered. "Pretty thing like you all alone in this big building. Might as well make yourself useful, if you can't count cash." He stepped around the counter, reaching for her wrist, where she struggled to get up. The younger man by the door shifted, discomfort flickering across his face, but he said nothing. That was when Billy stepped into view, one hand on the banister, the other loose at his side, fingers near the butt of his Colt. "Seems to me," he said, his voice calm but carrying through the room, "only man who ought to be ashamed of how he looks is the one raising his hand against a woman." 4 heads snapped around. The tall man's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a paying guest," Billy replied easily, coming down the stairs at a measured pace. His bare feet made no sound, but every board under him trusted his weight. "Thought I was buying a bed, and maybe some quiet, not a show put on by cowards." The big man let go of Claire's wrist long enough to square his shoulders toward Billy. "You got a mouth on you, boy," he growled. "This ain't your business." "You're right," Billy said softly. "It became my business when you put her on the floor." The scarred man snorted. "What's she to you? Some witch with mismatched eyes? Folks like her bring bad luck. We're just making sure she pays up before it spreads." Billy's gaze flicked to Claire, where she was using the counter to pull herself upright. Then back to the men. "Funny thing," he said. "Where I come from, we call eyes like that a blessing. Means God couldn't decide whether to give someone the sky or the fields, so he gave him both." The room went still for a heartbeat, as if no one quite knew what to do with a man defending a woman's beauty. Like it was a fact, not a weakness. Then the big man spat. "I'm done talking." He lunged forward, fist cocked for a swing meant to take Billy's head off. Billy stepped in instead of away, a sudden blur of motion. He slipped under the man's arm, brought his elbow up sharply into the exposed ribs, then pivoted, and drove his fist into the man's jaw, in one fluid, practiced move. The big man crashed backward into a chair that splintered under him, cursing as he went down. The tall, scarred man went for his gun. Billy's hand was already moving. He did not draw all the way. He simply slammed his palm down on the butt of the Colt, and used the weight of it to whip the barrel up, catching the man's wrist with a sharp crack that sent the revolver clattering across the floor. The third man grabbed for Billy's shoulder, and Billy twisted, catching the edge of the counter with one hand and driving a kick into the man's knee with the other. sending him sprawling. For a moment it looked as though it might end without blood, just bruises and wounded pride. Then the scarred man face twisted, dragged a small derringer from his boot. The barrel came up, shaky but aimed at Billy's chest. "I'll kill you for that, you little." The shot cracked through the lobby, deafening in the enclosed space, but it was not the derringer that fired. Billy's Colt cleared leather in a blur, and he put a bullet clean through the man's hand before the other gun could bark, dropping him to his knees with a howl, the derringer skittering away. Smoke curled in the air between them. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Billy lowered his gun slightly, the barrel still ready. "Next man who reaches for iron," he said mildly, "ought to ask himself if he can aim before I do." The big man on the floor groaned, trying to push himself up. The third was clutching his knee and cursing. Only the youngest by the door had not moved. He was staring at Billy, pale under his sunburn, and Billy watched something shift behind his eyes. Recognition settled there like a stone. Billy had seen that look enough times to know exactly what it meant. The young man glanced past Billy to Claire, to the ledger on the floor, then back. "Let's go," he blurted. "Now." "What?" the big man growled. "You done already? You don't see his face?" The younger man hissed. "The kid. That's Billy the Kid. I saw his poster in Lincoln last month. That's him." For a second, even the scarred man forgot his bleeding hand. They stared at Billy, really stared, and saw it. The boyish mouth, the sharp eyes, the easy way he stood with a gun like it was part of his arm. Fear slid over their features. Among outlaws and bullies, his name was a curse, and a warning both. "We're not done," the scarred man spat, cradling his ruined hand. "Mr. Vance hears about this. And if the price on your head is what I heard it is, maybe we won't even have to wait for him. You go tell your Mr. Vance," Billy said, stepping forward just enough to make them all shift back, "that if he wants payment, he can come ask for it himself. And if you call her a witch again, you better make peace with your maker before you do." They backed toward the door, dragging the wounded with them, too proud to run, but too shaken to stay. As they shuffled out into the street, the youngest man cast one last glance at Billy, not of hatred, but of calculation. Then they were gone, their boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt as they made for the saloon across the way. The hotel fell silent, but for Claire's breathing. Billy holstered his Colt, the adrenaline seeping from his bones, leaving behind the ache in his side. "You all right?" he asked, turning to her. Claire was already straightening the ledger pages with trembling hands. "I've had worse," she said quietly. "They usually don't do it where the guests can see." He frowned. "That's supposed to make it better?" "No," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "But it makes it easier to keep pretending it's just business." She winced as she tried to flex her bruised wrist. Billy stepped closer, gently taking her hand. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded, letting him turn her palm up, examine the red marks on her skin. His touch was surprisingly careful for a man whose reputation was built on pulling triggers. "Why do you let them come in here like that?" he asked. "Why pay them anything at all?" "Because the last time someone refused," she answered, her voice low. "They found him in the arroyo, with his pockets turned out, and his wife swearing he never made it home from town. Because when my parents tried to stand up to Caleb Vance, he made sure their stage never reached Las Cruces. Bandits, the sheriff called it. Bad luck. Everyone knew better." She slipped her hand from his, crossing her arms, as if suddenly cold. "They call it tax, what Vance takes. Protection tax. Every business in Esperanza pays it, one way or another. I pay so I can sleep with both eyes closed sometimes. Today I miscalculated." Billy studied her, the bruises, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she refused to let tears fall where anyone could see them. "Caleb Vance," he repeated slowly. "Rancher south of town, rides with a yellow band on his hat." She nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Not personally,"
Billy said, though he had seen the man's name in Jesse Evans' ledger, next to a list of figures, and the words Esperanza Hotel. But I know his kind. He wanted to tell her then about the book under his coat, about how her parents' death might not be just a story of bad luck and bandits. But the sound of swinging doors banging open across the street stopped him. The 4 men he had just sent away had pushed into the saloon, and even without hearing the words, he could feel the shape of what they were saying. His name, Jesse Evans. Reward. I reckon, Billy said, letting his hand fall away from her wrist, that I just made your life a fair bit more complicated. Claire gave a small bitter laugh. You reckon right, Mr. Bonney, but you also kept them from breaking my arm. Or worse. And you called my eyes a blessing. No one's ever done that. She looked up at him, the blue and green catching the light, and for a moment, everything outside the hotel fell away. If trouble's already knocking, she added, better it knocks on someone who knows how to answer it. Across the street, word spread like spilled whiskey. In a smoky back room of the Red Coyote Saloon, Caleb Vance listened as his men told him about the stranger, with the quick hands and the quicker gun, about the match between the face they had seen and the wanted poster pinned up in the sheriff's office. Vance was a big man gone soft, his once hard muscle padded with the easy excess of a bully who had eaten well off other people's fear. His eyes, though, were sharp, cunning little stones set deep in his face. A fresh poster lay on the table in front of him, and he ran a thick finger over the printed words.
Billy the Kid, $500 on the head from the territorial governor. And beneath that, scrawled in rougher hand, a promise posted in Las Cruces and Mesilla and half a dozen other places, a private reward of $5,000 in gold, offered by interested parties, no questions asked, deliver alive if possible, dead if not. Interested parties meant Jesse Evans and his kind. Vance knew, because he had once been one of those interested parties. His own name was written in Jesse's ledger as neatly as any bank customer's, beside counts of rustled cattle and quiet payoffs, beside the cheapest words in the world, taken care of, meaning someone who had become inconvenient, was now dead. One of those lines had carried the initials of Claire's parents, next to a figure and the phrase, accident handled. The memory of her father, Thomas Whitfield, refusing to sign falsified freight receipts, still stung like an old welt. Vance had never liked the way those two watched him, the way their daughter watched him now, her strange eyes, seeing too much. 5,000 in gold, the scarred man said, cradling his bandaged hand. For the kid. That's more money than this town's seen in 10 years. And he's upstairs in your hotel, Caleb, the big man added, rubbing his jaw. Just sitting there. All we gotta do is send a telegram south, let Jesse Evans know, and he'll ride up with his whole damned gang to fetch him. You could take your cut. Vance leaned back, chair creaking under his weight. $5,000. Enough to buy another ranch, another town sheriff, another judge. Enough to pay back any debt he imagined the world owed him. You think Evans will share that kind of coin? Vance grunted. He's not known for sharing much of anything. He'll share, the younger man said quietly. Because the kid stole something from him. That's what they're saying along the Pecos. Some book, something that's got Jesse more rattled than a snake in a grain sack. He wants the kid bad. He'll pay. Vance tapped the poster again, mind turning. He did not like the idea of Jesse Evans riding into his territory, reminding him of old days when Vance had been the junior partner in their arrangements. But he liked even less the idea of Billy the Kid under his roof, his presence a match held over a room full of oil. All right, he said at last. You send word. Tell Evans I'll hold the kid here, and we'll talk terms when he arrives. The scarred man shifted. What about the girl? He asked. She's getting uppity. Maybe this is our chance to settle that account too. Vance's mouth curved in a humorless smile. Her parents thought they could step away from business, that they could run their little hotel without letting bigger men leave their marks in the ledger. They paid for that mistake. The girl is just a loose end. If Evans gets what he wants, I'll see what I can get out of what's left. While riders pounded south to find Jesse Evans, the desert swallowing the thunder of their hooves, Billy and Claire sat at a small table in the hotel kitchen. The day's dishes stacked around them, a single lamp between them, casting shadows on the walls. Claire had wrapped her wrist herself, refusing his clumsy offer, but she let him pour coffee, even if it was weak and bitter. "Caleb Vance used to come here when my parents were alive," she said, fingers circling the chipped mug without drinking. "Always with different men, always at odd hours. They'd close the door to the back room. My father started keeping a second ledger, one where the numbers didn't quite match the first." She glanced up, eyes wary, as if expecting judgment. "He said some money was too dirty to write in the clean book." Billy reached into his coat, and after thinking it through, drew out Jesse Evans' ledger just far enough for her to see the edge of it, the worn leather, the careful stitching. "Your father wasn't the only one who thought that way," he said. "Only Jesse Evans' book doesn't bother pretending to be clean." Claire leaned forward, breath catching. "Is that what you stole?" Her voice dropped, reverent and afraid all at once. "From Jesse Evans himself." "From his man," Billy corrected. "But close enough. Names, dates, places. Vance is in here. So are a lot of other men. There's enough in this book to hang half of Lincoln County, if it ever made it to someone who knew what to do with it." "Someone like a judge?" she asked. "Or a governor?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I've met a governor. Wrote him letters, even. Men like that see a book like this. They don't think about justice. They think about where to wedge it, so it hurts the right people, and leaves their friends standing. But sometimes, even that's enough." He thought of John Tunstall, of Blood on the Snow, of the night the regulators had become something more than hot-headed boys with borrowed rifles. "I took it because Jesse's done worse than most. Because there had to be a way to make men like him watch their backs for once." Claire hesitated. Then she rose without a word and disappeared for a moment, returning with a small old cigar box. She set it on the table and opened it, revealing carefully folded pages, brittle with age. "My father's second ledger," she said softly. "Only pieces. He hid them when he realized someone had found out he was keeping them. I found the box after they died." She unfolded one page and laid it beside Jesse's ledger. The handwriting was different, but the names were not. Jesse Evans, Caleb Vance, amounts that lined up too neatly to be coincidence. Billy leaned in, the lamplight throwing their faces close together. "He was watching them," Billy said. "He knew." Claire swallowed hard. "He told my mother that one day, if the right man came through this town, they'd have enough proof to make those men pay. He never said who the right man was." She looked at Billy, really looked at him, seeing past the legend to the tired young man with worry lines at the corners of his mouth. Maybe he didn't know. Billy closed the ledger and pushed it back inside his coat, aware now that he carried not just his own grudges, but the weight of her father's too. "You need to leave this town," he said quietly. "Tonight. Vance's men will be back, and they won't come alone next time. Once Jesse Evans gets that message, he'll ride in here with every gun he can gather." Claire's jaw tightened. "And run where?" she demanded. "To some other town where men like Vance are waiting with open palms and shut hearts. This hotel is all I have left of them. These walls, these ledgers, their handwriting in every corner." "Walls can burn," Billy said, his voice gentle but firm. "What they left you isn't just wood and plaster. It's the kind of courage that makes a man hide the truth in a cigar box instead of looking the other way. You carry that, whether you stay or go." She went silent, fingers tracing the edge of the box. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady again. "If you leave, they'll still come after you. Vance doesn't forgive insults, and Jesse Evans doesn't forget the men who steal from him. If I stay, I'll be punished for helping you. If I go with you, I'll be hunted for knowing too much." She lifted her chin. "So maybe I go with you. At least then I'm riding toward something, instead of just waiting for them to knock my door down." Billy stared at her, taken aback by the quiet fierceness in her words. "Life on the trail isn't romantic," he warned. "It's cold and hungry and fast. It's not a story in a dime novel. Neither is this, she said, gesturing around them. This is just a slower death. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cheap clock on the shelf. Then Billy nodded once. All right, we leave at dawn. Before Vance can gather his courage or his men. They did not make it that far. The desert does not care for plans. Before the sky had even begun to pale, before Billy could saddle his horse and the bay mare Claire kept in the small stable out back, the bell at the mission on the hill above Esperanza began to clang wildly, a boy's panicked hands pulling the rope again and again. Billy was halfway to the stable with a saddle on his shoulder when he heard it, felt the faint tremor of hooves through the ground. He stepped into the street and saw it, a long line of riders cresting the rise to the south, a dark smear against the paling sky. At their head rode a man with shoulders squared and hat pulled low, a yellow band tied around it. Beside him, another man in a dark coat, lean and straight, his face turned toward town with the hungry focus of a hawk. Even at that distance, Billy knew him. Jesse Evans had come. There were not just a handful of men, not even a dozen. There were over 50 riders, spread in a rough wedge, rifles glinting in the early light. Behind them, dust rose like the ghost of some great beast stretched across the road.
52, Billy counted without thinking. 52 against one half-dressed outlaw and a hotel keeper with mismatched eyes. "Claire!" he shouted, dropping the saddle and sprinting back inside. She met him in the lobby, hair braided back, bag already packed, as if part of her had always known it would come to this. "They're here," she said, voice low. "I heard the bells. We're not getting out the front," he said. "Too many of them. Vance must have promised them a show." He grabbed her hand and dragged her toward the back hall. "There another way out?" "Old root cellar," she answered breathlessly. "My father cut a tunnel from it to the gully behind the hotel. For when the flash floods hit. It comes out under the mesquite, near the paddock. But if they're already circling, gunshots cracked outside, not aimed at the hotel yet, but fired in the air, wild whoops riding the sound. An old woman screamed somewhere down the street. Billy could hear riders splitting off, hooves pounding to flank the building. "We'll worry about the circle when we're halfway through it," he said. "Move." They ran down the narrow back stairs, into the cool dark of the cellar, the smell of earth and old potatoes enveloping them. Claire pulled aside a shelf that looked fixed in place, but swung out on hidden hinges, revealing a low tunnel shored up with timber. "My father never trusted calm weather," she murmured, ducking inside. Billy followed, the ceiling so low he had to hunch, Jesse's ledger thudding against his ribs with every crawl. Above them he could hear muffled shouts, boots on the porch boards, the crash of the front door being kicked in. "Bring me the girl and the kid," a voice roared, cold and clear. "Jesse Evans. Burn the rest if you have to." They reached the end of the tunnel, Claire pushing up a hatch, covered in dirt and brush. Morning light spilled in, harsh and white. The hotel loomed to their right, its back wall only 20 yards away. To the left, the gully cut down the hill to the dry creek, scrub and rock offering broken cover. Voices were closer now. Riders were already moving past the back of the hotel, rifles cradled, searching. "We go for the creek," Billy whispered. "Once we're in the wash, we can use the banks for cover and circle around to the far side of town. Our horses, if we make it that far alive, I'll steal us 2 more." Claire swallowed and nodded. They slipped from the hole, keeping low, racing for the edge of the gully. The ground trembled under the hooves of the men above. A shout went up as someone caught a glimpse of movement. There, behind the hotel, bullets snapped into the dirt around them, tossing up little puffs of dust. Billy shoved Claire ahead of him, his own body between her and the riders. Something punched his side, hard and hot, right where the earlier wound had been, and he staggered but did not fall, forcing himself into the gully. They tumbled down the bank, rolling, rocks scraping skin, and came up gasping at the bottom. "You're hit," Claire said, eyes wide. "Later," Billy gritted. "Run." They ran, bent low, scrambling over stones and roots as shots echoed overhead.
The banks shielded them from direct fire, but men on horseback were racing to cut them off where the gully opened out. Smoke began to creep into the sky behind them, ugly and orange. Claire glanced back, choking on a sound that was almost a sob. Flames licked up the side of the Whitfield Hotel, catching curtains, devouring wood made dry by years of desert wind. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Billy grabbed her arm, dragging her forward. "You can't help them now," he said, roughly. "If we go back, we die with those walls. Is that what your parents built this place for?" Tears gathered in her strange eyes, but they did not fall. She forced her feet to keep moving, even as the only place she had ever called home burned behind her, its windows glowing like open mouths. At the edge of town, where the gully met the dry bed of the creek, they scrambled up, using a dead cottonwood for leverage. 2 riders had tried to cut them off there, but the creek stones were rough, and the horses' hooves slipped. Billy took advantage of their hesitation, firing twice, not to kill but to send the animals rearing, dumping their riders. He and Claire sprinted past, using the sudden chaos to vanish into a stand of scrub beyond. They did not stop running until the town was a smear of dust and smoke on the horizon, their breaths ragged, Billy's side damp and sticky under his shirt. Only when Claire reached for him, fingers coming away red, did he allow himself to look. The bullet had grazed him again, tearing the already torn flesh, but it had not gone deep. "Seems like the good Lord's got poor aim today," he said, trying for humor and nearly failing. "Or maybe he just doesn't know what to do with the likes of me." "Don't you dare joke," Claire snapped, her hands steady as she cut his shirt away with a small knife from her bag, cleaning the wound with water from a canteen. "If you die on me now, I'll march right back into that town and haunt every man who ever said my eyes were cursed." He watched her work, the determination in her face, the way destruction had not shattered her, but sharpened her instead. The hotel was gone, her savings likely stolen or burned, yet she stood under the desert sun with her jaw set and her hands gentle. "You're stronger than you look, Claire Whitfield," he murmured. "I'm only as strong as I have to be," she replied. "Today that just happens to be more than yesterday." They rode double on the sorrel, leaving the mare tethered and loose in the scrub with hope she might find her own way. The desert swallowed them quickly, the smoke from Esperanza rising behind them like a signal fire or a warning. Billy had one destination in mind, a crumbling adobe near the Pecos, where 2 men he trusted with the thin thing that passed for his soul might be holed up, mending tack and singing old trail songs. Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Beaudry had ridden beside him through Lincoln County's worst days, through snow and lead, and nights when the only warmth came from the shared knowledge that they had chosen their side and meant to see it through. If there was a way to turn the weight of Jesse Evans and Caleb Vance against themselves, it would be with those 2 at his back. The journey took 2 days and a night, the desert shifting from blazing white to blue twilight and back again. They ate little, slept less, taking turns in the saddle. Claire learned fast. By the 2nd day she could guide the sorrel with light pressure, could read the sky for signs of a storm, could tie a bedroll tight enough that it did not bounce loose. Billy watched her as much as he scanned the horizon, aware that something fragile and fierce was forming between them in the spaces between words. They did not talk about love. They talked about practical things, about how to count shots in a gunfight, about how her mother had hummed old Irish songs while rolling out bread, about how Billy had learned Spanish curses before English prayers on the streets of Silver City. At night, when the stars were bright enough to make a man believe in something bigger than himself, they lay on blankets near the coals of a small fire, their shoulders almost touching. Claire would stare up at the sky, one eye reflecting the blue of distance, the other the green of possibilities, and Billy would feel the pull of something he had not allowed himself in a long time, the idea that his story might not already be written, all the way to the gallows. They reached the adobe, as the sun slid down behind low hills, painting the Pecos in bronze. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and lazy. A horse whickered from the makeshift corral. Billy slid from the saddle, his side protesting, and lifted a hand. "Tom," he called. "Charlie, you 2 dead yet?" or just hiding from your debts? A moment later the door flew open, and Tom O'Folliard burst out, all arms and grin, his dark hair falling into his eyes, a harmonica still in one hand. "Billy, you son of a gun," he whooped, striding forward to grip Billy's shoulder, and then pulling him into a rough hug that made Billy hiss. "Easy," Billy wheezed. "I'm held together by spit and stubbornness, as it is." Charlie Bauder followed more slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, his face quiet, thoughtful, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by sun and experience. "Trouble?" he asked, simply, gaze flicking from Billy to Claire, and back again. "Big as a freight train," Billy answered. "Tom, Charlie, this is Claire Whitfield." Claire, that long streak of bad luck and good heart, is Tom O'Folliard. The one pretending he doesn't care whether I'm alive or not, is Charlie Bauder. Tom swept his hat off in an exaggerated bow toward Claire, his brown eyes widening as he took in her hair and eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "I was going to say this is no place for a lady, but something tells me you're the reason Billy's still alive." "Only partly," Claire replied, managing a small smile. "The rest is his own stubbornness, from what I can see." Charlie nodded to her, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Any friend of Billy's we don't have to drag here. Half Dead is already ahead of the curve." Inside the adobe, over a pot of stew that smelled better than anything had a right to, in the middle of nowhere, Billy laid out the story, the ledger taken from Jesse Evans' man, the Whitfield Hotel, Caleb Vance's tax on the town, the assault on Claire, the fire, the 52 men who had ridden into Esperanza like they owned, not just the land, but the air. He set Jesse's ledger on the table, and opened it, flipping to the pages where Vance's name repeated, like a refrain. Claire added her father's copies, the ink faded but legible. Tom's easy smile faded as he listened, replaced by a look Billy had only seen a few times, when the stakes were higher than their own hides. Charlie's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming once on the table, and then going still. "So you stole Jesse's spine," Tom said at last, nodding toward the ledger, and Vance's conscience died with Claire's parents. "Both of them want the book, and they want you on a rope. And now they've decided to work together." "For now," Billy said. "Men like that don't share well. They'll ride in the same direction as long as the prey is ahead of them. Once it's between them, they turn their guns sideways." Charlie studied the rows of names and numbers. "There's enough here to hang them twice over," he said. "If we could get it into the right hands." "And where do you suggest we find those?" Billy asked. "Lincoln's still crawling with men who took Murphy's coin. The governor already turned his back on his promises once. You trust a court in this territory to stand up to Jesse Evans and his kind." "I trust Jesse and Vance to be more afraid of this book than any court," Claire said, quietly. All three men turned to her. "They burned my home trying to flush us out. They'll keep burning towns until they get what they want. So we don't hand the ledger to a judge, we use it ourselves." "How?" Tom asked, leaning back. "You planning on reading it aloud in the middle of church on Sunday?" "No," she said. "I'm planning on making them read it to each other." She reached out and placed her fingers on two names, linking them. "My father told me that when men like this work together, there's always a point where one needs the other more. Jesse needed Vance's hotel, as a safe place to pass money, to move people. Vance needed Jesse's reputation and his guns. But now, with this ledger, they also both fear each other. Each knows that if the other got his hands on it alone, he could trade it to the army, or the governor, for a lighter sentence. The only thing they might fear more than the law is betrayal." Billy's eyes sharpened as he followed her thinking. "You want to make each believe the other is already reaching for the ledger," he said slowly. "Not just with whispers. With proof." "Exactly," Claire said. "A page from this book in the wrong hands at the right time. A handwritten note that looks just enough like my father's, or Jesse's, or Vance's to seem real. A meeting arranged where they both think they are the buyer, and the other is the seller." Tom whistled low. "You set that up wrong, and you end up with both of them shooting at us instead of each other." "If we don't set it up at all," Claire replied, "they will hunt us until one of us is dead. Maybe all of us." There's no outrunning 50 men and their friends forever. So we give them something else to chase. Charlie frowned, thoughtful. There's that old mission, he said slowly. San Gabriel, up in the hills north of Esperanza, half falling down, but the walls are thick. Vance used to store whiskey there, before he built those sheds on his ranch. Jesse used it during the war as a meeting point. Neutral ground, he called it, even though there wasn't anything neutral about him. We can get there by the back trail, Tom added. Old mining road, hard going, but off the main routes. We could be there before either of them if we ride light. Billy looked at Claire. You're the one putting yourself in the middle of this, he said. You sure you want that? They burned the last thing I had that tied me to my old life, she said. From here on, I choose where I stand. I won't be just a woman behind a counter, waiting for bad men to come collect. If they want to call me a witch, I might as well use whatever magic they've given me. Tom grinned again, though there was a new respect in it. I like her, he told Billy. She talks prettier than you do, and she thinks ahead more. Billy rolled his eyes. Don't let it go to your head, he told Claire. He says that to every soul who saves my life. They spent the rest of the night, and half the next day planning, the air in the little adobe thick with ideas, and the smell of coffee. Claire practiced copying phrases from Jesse's ledger, mimicking the slant of certain letters, the way he truncated names. Billy and Charlie worked out possible positions in and around the mission, places where a single rifle could make 10 men think twice. Tom kept track of who would ride where, his easy humor smoothing over the edges when tempers began to fray. In the end, their plan had 3 parts. First, Claire would ride to what was left of Esperanza, not as the broken hotel keeper returning home, but as a woman with nothing left to lose and proof in her pocket. She would let Caleb Vance see one torn-out page from Jesse's ledger, one that showed his name beside sums that made it clear how deeply he was in. She would tell him that she had the rest, that she was willing to sell it, not to him, but to the army, unless he met her alone at San Gabriel. She knew Vance well enough to count on his greed and his fear. He would come, and he would not come alone, no matter what he promised. Second, Billy would make sure Jesse Evans heard a different story, that Vance had taken the ledger from the Whitfield Hotel before it burned, and was now planning to trade it in return for a pardon from the governor. A wounded member of Jesse's gang, ambushed on the trail by Billy and Tom, would be allowed to crawl back with that tale, carrying a scrap of paper in Jesse's own handwriting, that Claire had copied under Billy's guidance, something that looked like a list of meeting times, and Vance's name. Jesse, proud and suspicious, would never allow anyone else to profit from his secrets. He would come to San Gabriel as well, with as many men as he thought necessary. Third, Charlie, Tom, and a handful of men from villages along the Pecos, who had suffered under both gangs, would take positions in the hills around the old mission. They would have a small cache of dynamite from an abandoned mine, enough to bring down part of the cliff if they had to, not to bury everyone, but to seal escape routes or scatter horses. Their job would not be to fight both gangs head-on, but to make sure that once Jesse and Vance turned on each other, they could not easily escape, to regroup. It was a plan balanced on a knife edge, dependent on pride, fear, and timing. It was also, as Tom pointed out cheerfully, their only real chance. The days that followed moved like pieces on a chessboard. Claire rode into Esperanza, with her hat low and her shoulders squared. The ruins of the Whitfield Hotel, still charred and black against the sky. People stared, some with pity, some with fear, but none stepped in her way, as she walked straight into the Red Coyote Saloon, and faced Caleb Vance, in front of his men. They saw a woman they had tried to break, standing tall, a small folded paper in her hand. Vance saw the numbers written there, and went pale under his tan. The meeting at San Gabriel was set with harsh whispers and threats. Claire rode out of town without flinching, though her heart hammered in her chest, and Billy, watching from a distance through field glasses, felt pride and worry twist together inside him. On the other side of the territory, Billy and Tom ambushed 2 of Jesse's riders at a narrow pass, one bullet through a hat, another through a saddle, enough to knock them sprawling without spilling blood. He left one man to crawl back,
clutching a copy of Jesse's own hand, and whispered the lie into his ear with quiet precision. Vance is selling you out, he has your book, he's going to San Gabriel to trade it. Fear did the rest. The night of the meeting, the old mission crouched on the hill like a broken tooth, its bell cracked, its roof sagging in places. Inside, candlelight flickered on old stones and faded paintings of saints whose faces had long since peeled away. Billy stood in the shadows near the altar, the ledger under his coat, his hand resting lightly on his Colt. Claire stood a few feet from him, back straight, hair braided tight, wearing a faded blue dress she had salvaged from the ruins of her room, as if to carry some fragment of the hotel into this last stand. Scared? He asked quietly. Terrified, she answered. You? I've been terrified so many times I stopped counting, he said. But this feels different, because it's not just your neck on the line, she teased, though her voice trembled just a little. Because it's not just about who walks out with more bullets than holes, he corrected. It's about who will own the story when this is done. Outside, the sound of hooves approached from two directions. Charlie's whistle echoed faint and sharp from the rocks above, one group arriving from the south, another from the east, right on time. Caleb Vance arrived first, a dozen men at his back, despite his promise to come alone, his vest straining over his gut, his eyes darting around the mission like a man already measuring angles of escape. He stepped inside with his hat in his hands, sweat shining at his temples. You picked a hell of a place for a parley, girl, he said. What? The hotel you had burned wasn't available? Claire replied, her voice ringing off the stone. This was where you made your first deals with Jesse Evans, wasn't it? Thought it fitting you have a chance to make your last here. Vance's jaw clenched. You brought the ledger? You brought men, she countered. You think I'd walk in here with all of it in my hands? He took a step closer, and Billy shifted slightly, enough for Vance to notice the movement in the shadows. His eyes narrowed as he peered past Claire's shoulder. That him? He asked. The famous kid? Just Billy, Billy said mildly. The posters tend to get ahead of themselves. Vance snorted. You've brought me trouble, girl. You and your dead parents and their damned second ledger. Funny, Claire said softly. Jesse Evans said the same about you and his. The second group arrived moments later, the air tightening, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Jesse Evans walked into the mission like a man who owned the room, tall and lean, his coat dusty but neat, his hat tilted at a precise angle. There was a hardness in his eyes that Billy recognized from their time on opposite sides in Lincoln County, a cold focus that did not waste itself on bluster. He had not brought 50 men this time, but the ones who came were hand-picked, hard-faced, the kind who did not rattle easily. Well, Jesse drawled, his gaze moving from Vance to Claire to Billy. If this doesn't look like the start of a bad joke, rancher, witch-eyed hotel girl, and the kid walk into a church. It used to be a church, Claire said. Tonight it's just a room where men either tell the truth or die trying not to. Jesse's eyes flicked to her, curiosity sparking there. You've got sand, I'll give you that, he said. Then his gaze settled on Vance. You been doing business with me behind my back, Caleb? Trading my ledger for a pardon, maybe? Using my name to feather your nest? Vance bristled, looking from Jesse to Billy. That's what you told him? He demanded, glaring at Billy. That I'm selling him out? I told him what he was already halfway afraid of, Billy replied. Fear's like a fire, Mr. Vance. You just nudge it a little, and it does all the spreading on its own. Jesse took a step closer to Vance, his voice dropping. You think I rode all the way up here because I trust some wounded cowboy's story? I rode because I know you, Caleb. I know you keep 2 sets of books, I know you've been shorting me my cut for years. And now I hear you might have your hands on something that could hang me in Santa Fe, and let you walk away smiling. He held out his hand toward Billy, palm up. The ledger, he said, now. Billy did not move. Funny thing about leverage, he said. Once you hand it over, it's just weight. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Men shifted, hands twitching toward gun butts. Claire could feel her heart thudding against her ribs, the air thick with tension and the scent of old wax. This was the moment the plan teetered. If they misjudged it, 52 men might not be enough to bury the bodies that would fall here. She stepped forward, inserting herself between the 3 men. It was the most dangerous place, and she took it without flinching. You both think this ledger is your enemy, she said, holding their gazes in turn. But it only tells the story you wrote for yourselves. My father saw men like you come into his hotel, thinking they owned everything they touched. He wrote down the truth because he believed one day someone would make you read it out loud. That someone is me. She reached into her satchel and drew out a handful of torn pages, each one bearing the same careful script, the same damning names. She let them flutter to the floor between Jesse and Vance like snow, the ink dark against the stone. On one page, Jesse's name and Vance's, side by side next to an account of money moved that never passed through any legitimate ledger. On another, notations about a stage out of Esperanza that never made it to Las Cruces, the initials T and M Whitfield, cramped in the margin. Vance's face went blotchy. Those aren't, they're copies, Claire said. My father's copies. He knew men like you would come for the originals. Jesse stared at the page about the stage, his expression unreadable. You ordered that? He asked Vance quietly. Without telling me? Vance swallowed. They were asking too many questions, he muttered. And you were away, it was business. Jesse's jaw clenched. You cost me a clean route for my money, over a nervous hotel keeper and his nosy wife, he said. You think that's business? You cost me my parents, Claire snapped, turning on both men. You cost me the only home I had when you burned my hotel to flush him out. She jerked her head toward Billy. Now the ledger cost you every lie you ever told. You can shoot me, you can shoot him, you can shoot each other. But my father left enough copies in enough places that the story will outlive all of us. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then voices began to rise, scattered among Jesse's and Vance's men as they caught glimpses of their own names on those falling pages, or their friends' names, or sums that did not match what they had been paid. Suspicion, once planted, grew like weeds. You told me that raid was the governor's men, one outlaw snarled at another. But here it says you were paid by Vance. You said my brother died in a crossfire. Another shouted, jabbing a finger at Jesse. But his name's right here. You ordered it. Guns began to lift, not toward Billy and Claire, but sideways, at men who had ridden together for years. Billy glanced up, seeing the faint silhouette of Tom on the ridgeline, and gave the barest nod. The first shot came from a man near the back, his nerves too frayed to bear the tension. He fired at someone who had just called him a liar, the bullet slamming into a shoulder and spinning its target around. That shot was all it took. In an instant, the mission exploded into chaos. Men dove for cover behind pews and crumbling walls, shouting, firing at shapes they half recognized. Jesse barked orders, trying to regain control, but the noise swallowed his voice. Vance stumbled backward, reaching for a pistol tucked into his belt. Billy grabbed Claire and pulled her behind a fallen column as splinters flew. Above them, on the ridge, Tom and the men from the Pecos began firing carefully into the air and at the ground near the horses, not to kill but to panic the animals. The mounts screamed and bolted, ripping reins free, crashing into one another. Someone shouted that lawmen were in the hills, and that added another layer of fear to the madness. Charlie lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite and lobbed it toward a boulder above the narrow path leading away from the mission. The explosion was sharp and shocking, rocks tumbling down to block the route, dust and smoke adding to the confusion. It was like fighting in the heart of a sandstorm. In the swirl, Billy saw Jesse moving with grim purpose, shooting only when he had to, trying to gather men back to him. He saw Vance ducking and weaving, his only goal to make it to a side door and escape. Claire, Billy shouted over the din. Can you get to the back passage? The one Vance will try for? She met his eyes, understanding flashing between them in an instant. Yes, he's yours, Billy said. You wanted justice. Take it. She nodded once fiercely, and then she was gone, slipping through the broken pews like a ghost, head low, using the chaos as cover. Billy drew a deep breath, tasted dust, and turned toward Jesse. Evans. Because men like you killed better men than he throws a gun his home. He could mean change his way this territory works. He asked. There'll be another Jesse Evans by next spring. As you go off, he asked. There'll be another Jesse Evans by next spring. Maybe, Billy said, but he won't be you. And he'll know that the last man who wrote his own stories in other people's blood didn't die as old as he'd planned. Jesse smiled then, sharp, chilling thing. Come on then, kid, he said. Let's see if you're as fast as they say. Sign slowed.
Others kept firing, but their shots were wild now, panicked. Billy stepped down from the altar, breathing hard, his arm burning. He stood over Jesse, who was propped on one elbow, blood on his lips. "Guess the stories were true," Jesse rasped, a bitter laugh rattling in his throat. "About you, about me. Stories never get it exactly right," Billy said quietly. "They forget all the parts where we had a choice." Jesse's eyes flicked toward the ledger still under Billy's coat. "You think they'll write you as a hero now?" he asked. "For killing me? I don't think they'll write me as anything but what suits them," Billy answered. "But she'll know." He nodded toward where Claire had disappeared, and for the first time a flash of something like regret passed over Jesse's face. "You tell Vance," he said, voice thin, "if you find him before hell does, that I would have killed him myself for that stage." Then the light went out of his eyes, and Jesse Evans, who had once been the most feared name on the range, lay still on the cracked mission floor, just another man who had thought himself untouchable until the last bullet found him. In the rear passage, the air was cooler, the noise muffled. Caleb Vance stumbled along the narrow corridor, cursing under his breath, one hand on the wall to steady himself. He could hear the chaos behind him, and congratulated himself on having the sense to get out while the fools shot each other. There was a second exit here, an old side door that opened onto a narrow cleft in the rocks. If he could reach his horse, he could still salvage something from this disaster. Maybe there was a way to find the ledger later, to silence a few more witnesses. He rounded the last bend and froze. Claire Whitfield stood between him and the door, a rifle in her hands, the barrel steady, her mismatched eyes fixed on him. "Going somewhere, Mr. Vance?" she asked. He sneered, though sweat beaded his forehead. "You think you can pull that trigger, girl?" he taunted. "Your father couldn't. That's why he kept his little secret pages, instead of coming to me like a man." "My father trusted the law," she said. "He trusted that if he wrote down the truth and showed it to the right people, the world would right itself." She took a step closer, the rifle never wavering. "He was wrong, but I'm not him." Vance spread his hands slightly. "You shoot me, and you're no better than the men who burned your hotel," he said. "You want that on your conscience. You put my parents' blood on my conscience when you ordered that stage robbed," she replied. "You put the screams of every person you've bled dry on it when you sent your men to their doors. My conscience is already carrying more than you ever will." His eyes darted past her, measuring distance and angle. Claire saw the shift even before he moved. He lunged, not toward her but toward the door, hoping to push past while she hesitated. She did not. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, the sound cracking through the corridor like judgment. The bullet caught him high in the thigh, spinning him around, dropping him to the stone with a howl. She advanced as he clutched his leg, his bravado gone, his eyes wide and white. "You could have walked into a sheriff's office years ago and confessed," she said, voice shaking now with rage. "You could have stood up in my lobby when those men called me a monster and told them you were the only monster there. You had choices, day after day. You made them. This is just the last one." He fumbled for a small pistol at his belt, fingers slick with his own blood. "I'll see you dead, you witch-eyed," he began. But he never finished. She fired again, the second shot clean and sure, years' worth of fear and anger and helplessness, channeled into the straight line between her heart and her hands. When he fell still, she lowered the rifle slowly, her arms trembling. Tears finally spilled over, streaking her dusty cheeks, not because she regretted what she had done, but because there had been no other way left that would not mean leaving him free to hurt more people. Billy found her there minutes later, the din in the main hall fading as the remnants of both gangs scattered or surrendered. He took in the scene, the body on the floor, the rifle slack in her grip, the way her shoulders shook, and said nothing at first. He simply stepped close and took the weapon gently from her hands, leaning it against the wall. Only then did she look up at him, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "I did it," she said. "I killed him." "You gave him more chances than he ever gave you," Billy replied quietly. "And you stopped him from hurting anyone else. That's more mercy than most men like him ever see." She drew a shaky breath. "Does this make me like you?" she asked, raw honesty in the question. "Or like them?" "It makes you like yourself," he said. "The difference between us and men like Vance and Jesse isn't that we never pull a trigger, it's that we remember why, and we live with it afterward." In the days that followed, word spread up and down the Pecos of what had happened at San Gabriel. How Jesse Evans and Caleb Vance had turned their guns on each other's men over some damned ledger. How the kid had been there, and some say he'd pulled the strings like a puppeteer. Others say he just stood in the middle and refused to die. How a woman with witch eyes had walked into that mission and walked out with her head held high, while two of the meanest men in New Mexico bled out on holy stones. A handful of Jesse's men and Vance's, those who had thrown down their guns when it became clear they were fighting more ghosts than enemies, were taken into custody by a territorial marshal who just happened to receive an anonymous packet of pages in the mail. Pages with names and dates he could not ignore without implicating himself. Claire's father's careful copies had finally found eyes that could not pretend not to see. Esperanza, battered and half-burned, began slowly to shake itself awake. With Vance gone, his so-called tax vanished. People started to talk about rebuilding not for him but for themselves. The ruins of the Whitfield Hotel stood black and hollow for a time, a reminder of what had been lost. But one morning, as the light slid across the charred timbers, Claire rode back into town with Billy at her side, and Tom and Charlie a short distance behind. She dismounted in front of the ruins and just stood there for a while, letting the silence settle. "We can rebuild it," Billy said softly. "One day, when things are quieter." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I let it stand like this, a little while longer." A grave marker for the girl who thought she had to stay in one place and take what men like Vance gave her. She turned to him, the desert wind lifting a strand of her hair. "I don't know where I belong now," she admitted. "I only know it's not behind a counter, waiting for someone to throw a punch." He smiled, the tired, genuine smile that belonged more to Henry McCarty than to Billy the Kid. "I don't know where I belong either," he said. "But I know I ride better with someone watching my blind side." She reached up and touched his arm, just above the healed graze. "Are you asking me to come with you, Mr. Bonney?" she teased. "Or is that just your way of warning me I'll never sleep past dawn again?" "I'm asking," he said. "I can't promise you a house or a quiet life. The governor still wants me on a rope. There are still men who'd trade my name for a handful of gold. But I can promise I'll stand between you and as much of that as I can. And I can promise I'll never call your eyes anything but what they are." "What's that?" she asked. "The truest thing I've ever seen," he said simply. For a moment, the clamor of the town, the weight of their pasts, the shape of their uncertain future, all of it fell away. There was only the two of them, the burned-out shadow of an old life at their backs, and the open, dangerous, tempting road ahead. Claire rose on her toes and kissed him, not like a girl in a dime novel, kissing a hero who had just saved her, but like a woman choosing a man who had stood beside her while she saved herself. It was a slow, searching kiss, tasting of dust and hope, and the faint sweetness of stolen time. When they parted, the sky above Esperanza seemed a shade clearer. Tom Wolfe whistled from the shade of a nearby awning, and Charlie shook his head, though there was the ghost of a smile on his face. "You two done making the rest of us feel lonely?" Tom called. "We've got miles to ride before some sheriff decides to come asking questions." Claire laughed, the sound unexpectedly light in the scarred street. She swung back into the saddle with fluid ease, her blue eye and her green scanning the horizon like they had been made for the trail. Billy mounted up beside her, Jesse's ledger still tucked away, not as a burden now, but as a reminder of what men could do when they decided not to be stories told by others. They rode out of town four abreast, Billy, Claire, Tom and Charlie, hooves kicking up small storms of dust that twined together and then blew apart. Behind them, Esperanza began to stitch itself back together without the weight of the gangs on its neck. Ahead of them, the west stretched wide and wild, full of dangers and chances, and nights around small fires, where laughter could still rise in the dark. People would go on arguing for years about whether Billy the Kid had been a hero or a villain, whether Jesse Evans had been the devil himself, or just another man shaped by a hard land. But somewhere along the Pecos, in whispered stories traded over coffee and under stars, folks started telling a different version, one where a boy outlaw learned to fight with more than his gun, where a woman with mismatched eyes became the kind of witch men had every right to fear, and where two gangs that thought they owned a territory ended up losing it to people who refused to be afraid. And if you've followed this whole ride to the end, imagine you're sitting at a wooden table in some lantern-lit cantina, and tell me, on a scale from 0 to 10, how much did this story earn its place in your night? If it made you feel the dust, the fear, the courage, and the pull of those strange green and blue eyes just a little, then leave your score, stay with us for the next tale of the Old West, and don't forget to give that quiet nod that around here counts the same as a like and a promise to come back.